Okay, guys, welcome back to the Impetus Health podcast. I'm joined once again by the renowned, now you know, Swan Lake, the Nutcracker. She played James Bond's love interest in
Sure did. We'll splice a clip right in
in
here.
a play at, was it Tuscaloosa County High?
Yeah, it was our halftime show.
It was a halftime show?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
In the one you saw was Tuscaloosa County High, but I performed it in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
In Bryant-Denny Stadium.
The mecca
Wow.
of college football. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. We are going to talk about deadlifting today. So we have a course coming up called the Deadlifting in Depth by Vulcan Movement Systems. It's happening in January, and if you're listening to this after January, it's available online, and you can get it where things are online at the website vulcanmovementsystems.com. That's my ad for the day. So one of the things the reason why we want to talk about deadlifting, the reason we're doing a course on it, is that this is one of the most foundational movements that you can possibly do. I consider it the number one foundational movement of all of them. The second would be the squat. It's it. If you look at an older adult, when they drop something, they've got to pick it up. That's a deadlift. As for a baby, they drop something, they've got to pick it up. Deadlifting is foundational in everything that we do, and we have some interesting perspectives on this. So Rebecca is a CrossFit Level 2 coach. When we did your podcast on you a minute ago, we didn't even say you were a CrossFit Level 2 coach.
Oh, yeah, dang.
Rebecca is a CrossFit Level 2 coach. So you have personal trained. You have done everything roundabout on the fitness spectrum.
Yeah.
What have you done in like the fitness, strength, and conditioning spectrum, just from a bullet point perspective?
Collegiate strength and conditioning, with all of the sports except football and baseball. CrossFit coaching, personal training, master's performance here, which, I mean, is personal training for older adults. I guess that's it.
Yeah. So she has seen it a lot, and like we talked about on another episode with her that deadlifting was a pillar in every single thing at University of Alabama, and it is in every other thing in functional fitness.
Yeah.
It should be. And so from my perspective, I got into this to physical therapy from my strength conditioning perspective, and the deadlift was so foundational in any type of learning you did on Olympic lifting, powerlifting, the different types of deadlifting. It was just, you had to know that in order to progress to something else. So it's a big deal. Got into physical therapy, and from a physical therapy perspective, we talk about bulletproofing the body and trying to make the body as resilient as possible. Well, the deadlift is just one of the best ways you can do this, and it's available to everyone. You don't have to have much capability to pick something off the ground. And if you don't know how to move at all, it's a great way to start to move. So talking about the deadlift, Rebecca, let's do it on the group fitness side of things. When you were coaching CrossFit and some of that stuff, it's hard to do in a class of 30 people. But what were so you're looking around, you're looking for big faults. What were the big faults that you saw when someone was deadlifting? You're like, okay, I have to walk over there and say something to this person.
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing with CrossFit is we're all way too competitive, right? And we don't know when to stop. So the biggest, like, red flag that's got me, like, sprinting is, people putting on too much weight and maybe they start in a beautiful position, but then up goes the spine.
Yeah.
That's a no. It's a no for me.
We talk about that in our course, and we call it the movement tunnel. So however you enter the movement tunnel, you want to finish on the other side of the movement tunnel in the same position. So we'll look at a guy like I use Eddie Hall as the example a lot. Huge power lifter, had the strongest deadlift in the world for a while. And he starts off into, if you're looking at a textbook, in what would be considered a pretty bad position.
Yeah.
He starts off, back is rounded, shoulders are hunched over. It looks pretty rough, but when he lifts, he stays in that position throughout the entire lift until the very end, which you can debate on that at the very end topic. Is that bad? It might be kind of rough, but he's also doing this for sport. So anytime we convert something from a health and fitness perspective to a sport perspective, the odds of injury raise drastically.
Yeah.
So if you're Eddie Hall and you're lifting 1,000 pounds of a deadlift, that is 100% for a sport.
Yeah.
So your body's more prone to injury, but also it's built up a lot of resilience specifically for that sport. So we can talk about that too. So if the movement tunnel, as you enter, if something changes in the middle, then you've broken the link in the chain for a good movement at the end. So when you come out of the tunnel, if you look different than when you went in, something happened inside the tunnel, and it's really hard to control movement once you've already started it. So we try not to change anything once we enter the tunnel. So, okay, so you've seen a lot of nasty, I'm lifting something with a flat back, and then I go to a round back, and then I'll lock it out at the top.
Yeah.
That's big. What was something else that you saw from a big fault perspective, or maybe when you're personal training? What was something, because, as a coach, as a PT, you don't always say something. I'd say majority of the time, I'm not going to cue someone into a better position if their position is acceptable. And as long as their position isn't getting in the way of what we're actually trying to train.
Yeah.
So what would be something where, okay, I need to say something about this to this individual now on the personal training level?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing is more movement pattern, not necessarily like starting or ending position. I think in general, people know if their back is flat or not when they're set up, on the ground. But like the stripper deadlift, insane the amount of people that do that, and they have no idea that their butt has come up before their chest moves.
Yeah.
Which is dangerous. So
yeah,
I think more movement pattern cues as opposed to like starting ending position.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how many times I ask somebody who comes in the clinic to show me your deadlift, and they're showing me their deadlift, and you're right, they have no awareness of the movement at all.
Yeah.
And that's people starting with an injury, so something's already wrong. So this could be coming into that too. We don't have a neurological connection to our back, to our body. And then talk about somebody walking into the gym for the first time, they're going to do the same thing. Yeah. They're not hurt, but they're still showing the same issues. I think with the deadlift, a few things just to brag on it about is it's one of the best movements to teach someone awareness and to teach someone this is how you control your spine. Yeah. If we call it dissociation, when you bend over, you go into hip flexion. So if you're not able to dissociate your hips from your back, when the hips go into flexion, the back goes into flexion. So you see a lot of spinal flexion. That's the rounding of the back. If you can learn spinal awareness and kinesthetic awareness through the entire spinal column, through all the musculature, the neurological connection from the brain to the back, whenever the hips go into flexion, the low back will either stay neutral or go into slight extension. And that is showing a dissociative pattern, which is good. We're able to figure that out. And I think the deadlift, there's so many cues that we're going to get into. In the course, we get into all of these, but so many cues you can get into to teach someone how to control their spine when they're deadlifting. And this is one of my pet peeves with it in PT in general. And I guess it's less in the strength and conditioning world because coaches are kind of bred. We want to push weight a little bit. Yeah. But in PT, you can't hand someone a 2.5 pound weight and expect them to see any adaptation with a deadlift. Like 2.5 pound weights have their place. And maybe with a deadlift, you start there just to give some feedback. But weight is such an excellent adapter. Like it tells your body, okay, you're going to have to fight against some resistance in order to change. And with the deadlift, with any movement in general, you're almost threatening the body. Like we learned this in one-on-one exercise phys. Yeah. You go in there, working out fitness is, when done right, is a threat to the human body, and the human body adapts to that threat. Yeah. We talk about this a lot in our physical therapy evals. Like a physical therapy evaluation is, we're trying to expose you. It's like an exposure session. We want to see all your faults, and to do that, weight's an easy way to do it. Mm-hmm. I think some of the things that I see with a couple of ways you can approach the deadlift from a practitioner perspective. You can use it to say, okay, we have a lot of research on the deadlift being an excellent way to train the low back for strength conditioning, but also for if you have a low back injury. It's one of the best things you can do is to deadlift, particularly with isometrics, with eccentrics. If you know what a heavy slow resistance protocol is, again, all things we're going to talk about in the course, pitch number 4 or 3 at this point. But when you do the HSR protocol, you start with a 50-second isometric in a hinged position for a low back injury. That's a long time.
That's so long.
Yeah, like
I'd be shaking.
Like when I've tested on myself, I've done 95 pounds for a 50-second isometric, and I'm shaking up and down. Yeah, it's like you're twerking on the barbell at that point because it's so bad. But so the deadlift's such an excellent way to train this. But another beautiful thing about deadlifting and all of the movement patterns, really all of our foundational movement patterns, deadlifting, squatting, overhead positions, they transition across the board, across the entire movement spectrum. So you're a dancer, you're a ballerina. Mm-hmm. You are a ballerina. That's awesome. So if you look at the best ballerinas in the world, they're good because they are so aesthetically pleasing. They have learned lines and symmetry. Yes. So when they go into a plie, their knees aren't caving so far inside their toes where it looks nasty. No, everything's in a wonderful line. We can take those same concepts from the dancer and apply them to someone who is trying to pick up as much weight as they possibly can in a deadlift, all the way to a linebacker trying to drive through another human being to put him on the ground. It connects so well. So from a therapeutic perspective, from an in-depth coaching perspective, you can pick apart someone's deadlift to train certain aspects. So if I want someone to, if we're picking up a deadlift and if we're picking up a barbell or a kettlebell, whatever it is, and I'm seeing their knees collapse even a little bit, if I see that as a CrossFit coach, I'm not going to say nothing. I'm not worried about the knees collapsing unless it's just like Bambi's legs hitting together. I might say something then. But if I'm watching them do it and they're collapsing a little bit, I'm not going to say anything. But from a practitioner standpoint, that tells me that, okay, their arches are collapsing, their knees are going into valgus, their hips are going to internal rotation. If that's happening, the femur is likely running into the acetabulum, therefore their back's going to round, their shoulders have to round in that position. You can't stay. There's just so much that you can look at from one simple movement flaw on the deadlift that all of a sudden you can take the deadlift and you can train someone from a foot intrinsic perspective. You can train plantar fasciitis with a deadlift. You can train, I have a guy right now who's finishing up. He had gout, and we're working through gout, which is absolutely brutal. There's a lot of dietary stuff there, but we're deadlifting to try to rehab with gout because there's so much focus on the foot. So if you know these movement principles in pitch number 5, this is what we're talking about in the course. If you know these movement principles, then you're going to be great as a therapist or a coach because you can literally dissect movement. And that's one of the coolest things. And you can we talk about function all the time. If you know how to take the deadlift, the squat, overhead positions, and use them for almost everything that you're trying to do for your athlete, you can stay incredibly functional and train the body at the same time and not have to get into some weird movements or weird movement patterns. You always need to get specific, and someone in particular is always going to have a need for specific movements. But at the end of the day, you want to get as close to their function as you can. So that's why I love the deadlift, and it's just an excellent movement to train. So on the other side of things, on the more advanced sports side of things, when you started CrossFit, when you converted from strength conditioning to CrossFit, what was your starting deadlift PR, the first time you actually tried to set a PR? Do you remember?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this interjection. I have a public service announcement. The first time we recorded this podcast, Sean asked me in the next clip that you will see what my 1 rep max deadlift was. I said a blasphemous number. It was not true. So I went home. I was guilt-ridden. I could not sleep. And I told Sean he could not publish this until I fixed it and told the truth. So my 1 rep max was 375. Nowhere near that now. That was back in my prime. Anyway, so please ignore the awkward silence in the next clip. I told him he had to scrub the sound. And then we'll go on. Maybe 65 pounds. They're at Alabama. Shut up. In the weight room, they didn't have.
You probably weighing 105 at that time. Yeah.
The strength to body weight ratio was still there. Okay. They only had 45-pound bars. They didn't have 35. So I will say some of it was my grip.
Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
But the 10-pound plates were these, like, wimpy little, like, they were, like, a centimeter thick. And they were so lame. And I just remember the first time deadlifting, I was, like, shaking, getting 65 pounds off the bar. And I was pissed that these, like, wimpy little plates were on my bar. I was like, oh.
All right. Yeah. And then your all-time PR was? Now, a lot of that is absolutely going to be, we're figuring out our bodies, we're figuring out strength conditioning, but at some point you plateaued. At some point you likely would have plateaued. What were some of the things that you did to actually train the deadlift to continue to progress?
Oh man. Well, I had a coach, shout out Jake. Yeah. And let's see, we did a ton of band work for speed coming off the floor. We did a ton of deficit work. So like I would be on, plates or like the top little portion of a jerk block and do like deficit deadlifts. I guess those are probably the two big things we did.
Yeah.
Like a lot.
That's excellent. A deficit deadlift is literally when you're starting, like you're reaching below the ground. So your feet are elevated and the bar is lower than what it normally would be. Yeah, I think so for me too. I'm not gonna lie, I hate training the deadlift. Like I love what the deadlift does, but man, it is so taxing on my nervous system. Like at one point I was training deadlifts twice a week. And in conjunction in CrossFit, you might be training that twice a week, but I was also lifting. I wasn't squatting much, but I was cleaning, I was snatching, I was doing a lot of pulling. And I just remember after deadlift days, I would just be so gassed.
Yeah. And
went home and just laid down, couldn't do anything else. And I think for you, and so much of it comes back to genetics, I think you're more predisposed for the deadlift in general, like, cause was that your biggest lift?
Oh yeah, by far.
Yeah. It was a weak lift for me.
Yeah.
So I had to put so much effort into it. I actually think that the things that you're really good at, so like, I was decent at gymnastics. I was a really good snatcher. So if I really went at it hard on snatching, then I was totally gassed. Like it was everything I had. Deadlift, I just did so much volume with it that it crushed me, I think.
Yeah.
But some of the things that you look at, some of these, some of the power lifters like Eddie Hall, and some of them, like they're staying in their wheelhouse. They're doing it 4 days a week of pretty heavy deadlifting. And like a lot of folks, like we just had Squatober in October.
Yeah.
And then I want to say November is like, there's another term for deadlifting, and they do it in December or something like that. Yeah. I can't remember what it is, but literally it's 5 days a week of this stuff. And that's brutal. Like you've got to control your percentages. There's so much that goes into it to stay healthy there. But when you started training the deadlift, what were some ways that it connected to everything else? How did you see the other things that you were doing in your training get better, or did things diminish?
That's tough. I will say I was so green when I started out that everything got better just exponentially.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing that the deadlift did for me was it taught me how to be comfortable with a barbell, because it was like such a foreign object to me. Yeah. So just like the foundational like confidence that I needed to then go and do, like if you can't snatch with confidence, you're gonna get hurt.
Yep.
And so that was big. And then of course like starting like once my deadlift got stronger, then obviously like my clean and my snatch and everything got better.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I think the deadlift is just a beautiful entry movement for anything, for kettlebells, for dumbbells, wall balls, all of it. Like I think it's a great entry movement. And I would say the same thing for me. The deadlift, because it was a weaker movement for me, typically when you train your weaknesses, everything tends to get a lot better. Like I'm not a good runner. And when I trained running, I got stronger when I started running. That's so crazy. But with deadlifting, when I really focused on it, everything pulling, just whether it was overhead pulling or anything, just felt so much better. And I hate to say this, but like I guess it's true, but my stability overall, like when I would catch a heavy clean or when I would catch a heavy snatch or something like that, man, I just felt so much more stable at the bottom. I remember feeling that because I went through a 12-week cycle with it, and it was one of the most brutal cycles I've ever done. But yeah, I'd say in general with deadlifting, if you train that one movement, all of the other functional movements tend to follow.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I would definitely also add that I would attribute a lot of my core strength to deadlifting, which then obviously translates to everything, catching, barbell, stability. That's what made me think of it.
Yeah. I want to tell you guys about Vulcan Movement Systems. That is our continuing education courses built for the healthcare practitioner, the coach, the trainer, the doctor, the chiropractor, the physical therapist who wants to utilize strength conditioning methods in their own healthcare practice. We have courses on deadlifting, on squatting, on overhead positions, on the energy systems, aerobic and anaerobic. We have courses on running assessments. We have courses on blood flow restriction training. We have lots of different courses on some very hot but proven topics in the strength conditioning and the rehabilitation world. So if you're interested, you can go to vulcanmovementsystems.com. You can check out our courses, and there's 9 courses for 2024. If you are around Alabama, we'll have a course every month of next year. So sign up for the in-person course and you can show up. We'd love to see you, or you can take the courses online from the comfort of your own computer. So check out the courses. Again, vulcanmovementsystems.com. We'll have a link in the description, and learn all about how you can incorporate strength conditioning methods into your practice as a healthcare practitioner. Anything you would like to add on the deadlift from a 1,000-foot perspective?
No, I think, like, in general, I think coaches, one thing that, like, coaches everywhere should do a better job of, maybe be more mindful of, is, like, explaining why you're doing what you're doing, which I know is a lot of why we're doing this podcast. But but even, like, when I was coaching, I would always say, like, okay, here's your workout for the day. Here's the stimulus that we're looking for. And I would never say, like, this is why we're doing this movement. This is why you should be deadlifting. This is, and I feel like, on the other side, like, as an athlete, if I had taken the time to learn, like, why these things are important, I would have cared a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something everybody should be a little more mindful of.
I would agree with you, and I think mine would be on deadlifting in particular is like Rebecca said, is if you can be mindful of what the intent is anytime you do anything, that's just good advice for anything at all. But for the deadlift in particular, if you're doing a workout and the coach says the stimulus today is we're trying to go heavy, we're trying to challenge your strength, then don't drop it down and make it a cardio workout, make it a strength workout. Or if it's a cardio workout and the stimulus today is volume, like, let's do volume. And we could talk about form all day long, and the CrossFit form of the deadlift when you've got 95 pounds in the bar, maybe 135 on the bar, and you're going at it. Is that a bad thing? No, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like if you only are going to turn on all the core stability and strength you have when you need to. And if it's super light, you don't necessarily need to. There's nothing wrong with that movement pattern. That is, in your everyday life, if you drop a credit card on the ground, you're going to do a pretty nasty deadlift to pick it up. It's not going to be bad. I think the biggest thing, people are always looking for a single movement that causes the problem. What caused my injury? Where did things go wrong here? Every now and then there is, but most of the time it comes down to your nutrition. It comes down to, have you progressively overloaded correctly, or all of a sudden did you go from working out 3 days a week to 6 days a week? Did you go from working 6 days a week to 3 days a week? It works both directions. That's normally I would say the biggest causer of any issue, and people always tend to come back to deadlifting because it tends to be the heaviest weight, and you can identify what you were doing the most on that. So I think my advice on deadlifting would be, like Rebecca said, take it seriously. Really hammer your movement patterns. If you are a sumo deadlifter, great. Then really focus on sumo deadlifting. We can talk about the differences between sumo deadlifting. You're relying far more on your anatomy. So it would be excellent to try to train a more I was going to say conservative, a more traditional deadlift as well. You can play around with the grips a little bit. People ask a lot about wearing a belt. When should I wear a belt? I think my advice on that, I tried to train without a belt until I got to 80 to 85%, and then I would put a belt on. I also tried to train without shoes in that way because I wanted my feet to try to provide that stability themselves. And the deadlift is an easy way to do that. If you're deadlifting and your arches are collapsing, if it's heavy enough for your arches to collapse while you're deadlifting, I'm going to say you probably can't deadlift it. But if you can maintain an arch, then you're likely going to be able to lift that barbell. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. Hot take. Yeah, real hot take. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'll have to say on deadlift. If you guys are interested, again, we have these courses, the Vulcan Movement Systems. Our first one is the Deadlift in Depth on January 27th. It's online, it's in person. You can do it however you want to. After that course is done, we're actually going to have some other online courses on it. But it's a great one to start with because it is so foundational.
Yeah.
And it will teach you so much about your body and about how can I take this one movement and rehab, coach, train so many other aspects of the human. So it's a good one to start on.
Yeah, for coaches and athletes.
Yeah, exactly.
And your not even like a competitive athlete, just your everyday athlete.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be there.
All right, thanks guys. Appreciate it.